Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 11th, 2020. Time for another show. I keep saying it, but it keeps happening. And, I think I'm sort of prepared. All right, well, we can certainly fill 2 hours with fascinating subject matter. No doubt about that. We can start with Bill's morning tweet. It just came across the transom here. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That's what I came to say. Copycat. I can't believe this guy. Anyway, with the election results in turmoil, and I guess they are, even though they're not, the question is asked here. Is Kagro X, me, David Waldman, is me, am I, about to suggest we appoint Ted Cruz president to seal our country's doom so we can just get it over with already? Stay tuned. Well, you don't have to stay tuned long. I do not suggest that. Ted Cruz suggests that, though. I see this morning, well, he's throwing everything into turmoil. We got a lot of issues to settle here. If you believe, well, certainly if you believe Republicans, we have a lot of issues to settle. They're wrong, they're lying, but as part of their short-term play for, I guess, keeping their heads above water, Donald Trump has demanded this fealty from all of them. They all have to contest they think they're contesting the presidential election, but they're doing so in a way, of course, that calls almost all of the elections, I guess, if not all of them, into question. Of course, it's their contention that there was something wrong with the way balloting was done in, well, let's see. It depends on who you ask. How many states? 4, 5. How many states is Texas now suing? 17 states having joined Texas. I know there were 4 originally. It was up to 5 perhaps yesterday. Or I don't know. Or maybe we're miscounting. But really, it doesn't matter how many at all. The strange circumstances surrounding the Texas suit are enough to start asking questions about election certificates if you want to. I mean, to me, of course, the answer is no. All the authorities in charge of the elections say they've checked and checked again, and everything seems to be just fine. The Texas theory under which they're challenging the other states' votes on their based on their, I guess, their methods of balloting and their methods of counting the ballots once they've been collected, et cetera, is somewhat separate. But then, of course, there's the Pennsylvania objection. The Pennsylvania state legislators, the Republican legislators, have prevailed upon their Pennsylvania congressional delegation to object to their own states, Commonwealths, electoral votes in the count on January 6th. But this poses all sorts of problems. Like I say, ordinarily, I guess, as we've explained in the past, it doesn't really cause a problem. But I guess if you were to take their objection seriously, for instance, I guess one of the things about the Pennsylvania plan, as it were, is that I guess it's at least a little bit more coherent than the other plans. I don't know how much of this work Texas does, but Pennsylvania's plan is to come to the floor on January 6th and say, we object to counting Pennsylvania's electoral votes. And I don't know if the Pennsylvania crew plans to object to any other states' votes. And I'm not certain whether anybody from outside of Pennsylvania plans to object to Pennsylvania's votes. But Mo Brooks, for instance, appears ready to object to any number of states, maybe all the states having their electoral votes counted. I'm not certain what his plan is. I just know that he is talking about making an objection. And I assume he's aiming at objecting to enough electoral votes such that there would be no majority of the 538, anyway, available to either candidate, and so throw the election to the House. But, of course, the issue is if the reasoning for it is that the balloting was handled improperly in these states, then Well, of course, I think you know where we're going with this. Those members of Congress were elected on the same ballots, and those ballots were handled the same way, at least with respect to the objections being made in the various courts and in the various lawsuits that are still alive. And that puts the House and, I guess, Senate leadership in kind of an awkward position if you care to give those claims any credence. And it may just be that strategically and legally the Democratic leadership in both of the houses has reason to simply say, well, we don't give these suits any credence at all, and so we won't be capitalizing on them either. But if you're to take these claims at face value, you got 106 members of the House, apparently. 106 Republicans in the House have signed on to the Texas lawsuit. I mean, it's a little bit strange. They shouldn't have any standing in any of this. I'm not 100% clear in what respect they have signed on. I just see that this is the news, and perhaps we can track it down and see whether we're just signing an open letter in support of this suit, or are we trying to join as parties? I'm not certain. But either way, what's going on here is that there are 106 Republican members of the House who, for whatever reason, have now made a confession to the Supreme Court of the United States after a fashion of that they don't believe that they have been duly elected. I mean, they're not saying that. They, of course, would prefer that the court regard their plea as meaning, well, we think the balloting for our seats was handled properly, but somehow the balloting for the presidency was handled improperly. And you might be able to construct a story under which that's plausible. I don't know. I mean, it depends specifically what their complaints are about how the ballots were handled. I guess if you were to construct a complaint that said, well, all the balloting was handled properly and all the people who got ballots were supposed to get ballots, that's not the heart of their theory to date. But if you were to say that and then claim that all the ballots were collected properly and processed properly right up to the point where the results of those ballots were tallied, and then somehow the state personnel in charge of tallying the numbers were moved for one reason or another to manipulate the numbers for the contest for the presidency, but were 100% accurate in the counting of everything else, then I suppose you might be able to say, well, we get our seats, but nobody, the president doesn't. That is to say, Joe Biden doesn't get seated. But I haven't seen anybody construct that complaint. So, it might be worth at some point, perhaps, I was going to say January 3rd, which is usually the date on which a new Congress will convene. Ordinarily, though, I think the instructions are that they will convene on January 3rd, except in the case where January 3rd falls on a Sunday, because we're still hung up on that Sunday thing in this country. And then they would ordinarily, I guess the practice would be to bump it to Monday the 4th. But I see no indication that anybody's doing that. And every time I look it up just to make sure that they are doing that, I just see them saying, no, Congress is scheduled to convene on January 3rd. And I'd be surprised if it was on a Sunday, but, whatever. We should get over that weird tradition and just go ahead and do it. I don't mind. But I'm still not 100% clear on when that's happening. But at any rate, the complaint that these Republicans are making is aimed at January 6th. But I don't know if they survive to January 6th to object to the vote, the electoral vote count in the joint session of Congress that's held to tally those votes and officially ratify the election of the president and vice president. If they're saying that there was something wrong with the balloting, I think they have a problem that starts on January 3rd, which is to say, they've made pleadings or joined pleadings to the Supreme Court of the United States that said there's something wrong with the balloting. I don't think you can seat these 106. I mean, technically, I guess you could say they could expand the complaint and say nobody from any of the following states ought to be seated, and that would include Democrats and Republicans. But on the other hand, I guess if you took some testimony or had some debate about that on January 3rd, when everybody is supposed to present their certificates of election, have them validated, and then take the oath of office, you could say, well, so far the testimony is that all these guys here, these Democrats, say, we think our certificates of election are valid. We hope you'll think so too. And the clerk of the House has no reason to believe that they're not valid. And in fact, the clerk of the House has no reason to believe that the Republican certificates of election aren't valid either. It's just that the Republicans are standing here saying that they are. So we should take them at their word, I guess, because it's a matter of it's a question of the privileges of the House. These people claim to have been elected to the House of Representatives, and we ought to settle this issue. I don't know why they dispute their own election, but they do. They don't do so directly, but they do it obliquely. And the only logical conclusion here is that the balloting was done incorrectly in their races for some reason. I don't know why they don't claim it wasn't the case for Democrats. Maybe they do, but in this case, it's a he said, she said situation, whereas in your case, Republicans, you agree. He over here says your election certificate's fine. You, on the other hand, say it's not. And I guess I'll take your word over theirs. It's your certificate. If you don't want it, that's your business. I guess I'll enter that as a plea. And I would say, you're going to have to stand aside. Can't take the oath of office today until you settle whether or not your election certificate is valid. I don't know why you said that, but you did. And P.S., if you don't say that, if you're out there signing pleadings to the Supreme Court that says that your certificate of election is possibly invalid, but showing up here saying, no, here it's valid, there it's invalid, I would say, well, welcome to the Ethics Committee. I'm going to have to file a complaint against you. It's unethical for you to be doing this, and unethical for me to administer the oath of office to you, and I'm sorry, you're just going to have to stand aside. And if that means, for one thing, that you're not available with floor privileges on January 6th and so can't stand up and make your objection to the counting of the electoral votes, it's just a sad side effect. But we'll settle your case soon enough, and probably in your favor, too, because, after all, we have good reason to believe that those certificates are okay. It's just your casting doubt on them that worries us. So we'll investigate, and we'll find out probably around January 7th that everything is okay. But in addition to not being on hand on January 6th to lodge their own objections, they also would not be, I suppose, around to constitute state delegations should it come to the point where the House of Representatives is tasked with choosing the president, since a majority of the electoral votes, for whatever reason, couldn't be mustered. And, I guess in that case, Joe Biden wins, too. I take care of a lot of problems with this. Similarly, over in the Senate, I don't know if any Republican senators have joined in supporting this suit. I don't think so, but we do have the same problem. Ted Cruz, though, came up because, in Bill's comment, because, I don't know, he decided to join in this stupid game. And what did he tweet? It was Tom Wright tweeting that Tom Wright, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, in case you're wondering, and picked up on an Axios report running under the headline of Biden cabinet picks face GOP hurdles. We already knew that was the case, but the pull quote that Tom takes out of the Axios piece is Ted Cruz telling Axios, quote, "As long as there's litigation ongoing and the election result is disputed, I do not think you will see the Senate act to confirm any nominee," I guess for cabinet picks or anything else. And, I knew that they would be engaging in some sort of obstructionism. And this one, it makes sense in the context of they're pressing this ridiculous litigation. I don't think the litigation is worth anything, but if they're pressing it, then consistency, I suppose, logical consistency. Why bother talking about that with Republicans? I don't know. But logical consistency, I guess, would require them to say, well, we're not going to confirm a cabinet for a president that we don't know is going to be the president yet because there's litigation ongoing. By the way, this is no different in kind from the explanation Mitt Romney has given. I don't know that Mitt Romney is going to commit or would commit. It would just be weirdly inconsistent, as a matter of fact, for him to do so. But I think he might, to say, well, President Trump is perfectly within his rights to litigate things, but I'm going to confirm his cabinet anyway. Like, I believe he won, but Trump can litigate. But anyway, there's really nothing different here from what Romney actually said on the record than what Cruz is indicating here, that this is okay and the litigation has to be settled. And, Cruz is probably going to take that coy position of, I'm not saying I know how this case is going to come out, and I'm not saying that Trump's claims are necessarily valid or Biden's aren't. I'm just saying until the courts rule, and if the courts rule in Biden's favor, I will at least agree that we should take up the nominations, but then I'll be working to block them. So it's a possible position for him to take. But, this raises another issue. Is once again, even though this time Republican senators aren't questioning the validity of their own electoral or election certificates, I suppose in this case we might question them for them. It's maybe a weaker case than you would have in the Senate or in the House if the Republican senators aren't questioning their own certificates of election. But we can raise that question for them, certainly. Ted Cruz says as long as there's litigation ongoing, we can't act on confirming nominees to the cabinet. How about as long as there's litigation ongoing that implicates all the balloting in some of these states? Well, we're just not going to be able to seat those senators until courts tell us that the balloting was handled properly and their election results are valid. And the rest of you here are going to have to stand aside. I wouldn't mind doing that, and it might even improve our chances of electing Kamala Harris as vice president if we got to that weird situation where the Congress selected the members of the executive branch. Okay, well, I don't know. I don't think we get to that point, but that's what Donald Trump has set up for us. Trump is having a morning, as it happens, and is tweeting up a storm of stupid things on a number of topics, and he's stupid on all of them. So again, weirdly consistent across areas that way. Oh, look, here's something about the suit here. Jake Tapper, as a matter of fact, referring to them as the Kraken Caucus, 106 House Republicans signing on along with 18 state attorneys general with the Texas lawsuit. But there's a list somewhere, and Jake is including Josh Krashour's Hotline Josh's tweet that they're setting up the contest between the traditional House Republicans, the 90 who didn't sign on to this suit, versus the Kraken, which he doesn't go ahead and call them the Kraken Caucus. The Kraken is the 106 House Republicans who did sign. Let's see. Here we are. He's embedding the tweet of John Krusel, Supreme Court and legal affairs reporter for The Hill, who has, now we see the provenance of this. This is a new amicus brief from the 106 House Republicans in support of Texas's bid to overturn the presidential election anyway. And he's got the pages listing the names of the 106. And I suppose there's a case for reading all the names on the air as a formality, I suppose, and listing their names. Lots of reactions out there on Twitter from, this is an act of sedition and we ought not to seat them because they're, seceding from the union or hold themselves out as seditious traitors and whatnot. And that's fun language. I don't know how the grounds would be for excluding them at this point from the Congress based on accusations of sedition. I suppose you got to have a trial about that. And of course, sedition, kind of an antiquated topic and never really, I think middle and high school civics sort of taught us, much as that did with court packing, that the Alien and Sedition Acts were automatically bad things, and so then you hear the sedition word again, and you say, I thought that was a dumb and antiquated term, and it's still a live issue. And of course, made a lot more sense in the Civil War context when they did, in fact, expel elected members of Congress from the Confederate South. But okay. Anyway, the 106 are listed here. They include all the the regular suspects, of course, and probably a little bit more, and some names you haven't heard of. So do take note of the list, I guess, and make mental notes about it. But yeah, I wonder if we could take, I guess if they're just signing on as amici to the Texas suit, that helps explain things a little bit. I wonder whether they anybody has taken a look at what their actual pleadings are. We can poke around, I suppose. Well, here's some quotes from it, as John Krusel grabs from it. This brief represents our concern as members of Congress, shared by untold millions of their constituents, that the unconstitutional irregularities involved in the 2020 presidential election, cast doubt upon its outcome and the integrity of the American system of elections. But I guess it still matters exactly mechanically what they say is wrong in terms of separating it logically and legally and mechanically from their own elections. Let's see. An analysis that John offers up here. Texas pro-Trump SCOTUS bid is a likely loser. Great analysis, I know. Everyone knows that per law experts, fact checkers, and political analysts, the legal ideals are silly. The statistical claims are bogus, and it may be a calculated political tribute to by the Texas AG and accused crook for a Trump pardon. We definitely mentioned that yesterday. I guess that's actually the end of the analysis. A very thumbnail analysis by John Krusel. Didn't really tell us too much. But their suit can be a loser, but I guess under the theory that existing and ongoing litigation casts a cloud over the Biden presidency and therefore should put a hold on considering all of his cabinet nominees, I guess by the same token, you'd have to say, well, it casts a cloud over the election of certainly of every member who admits that there's reason to believe there's something wrong with his certificate of election. And although I think you're wrong, and eventually we'll find that the certificate is just fine and have to admit you to the House, we just can't go ahead with the formalities of it until this is settled. And this happens from time to time. Election certificates are disputed from time to time, or at least the outcome of House elections, they get disputed more often than presidential elections. And there's a procedure, and you ask the purported member-elect to stand aside from taking the oath with the rest of them, and you refer the case to the House Administration Committee, and they have some hearings, and they try to figure out what to do. We've even seen it happen in the Senate. Not, every time, but it doesn't happen all the time in the House either. Most frequently in the House, obviously, because there's 435 members contesting elections every time. The Senate, of course, only sees about a third of its members up for election in each 2-year cycle, so there are fewer targets. But many of you will remember that when Norm Coleman contested his election and contested the election of Al Franken to the Senate in Minnesota, that case dragged on for a long time, and Minnesota worked with one senator for all that time. His vote was very necessary, would have been much appreciated for a lot of the early work that Congress did, but he wasn't available, Al Franken, to take the oath and cast votes. We were, robbed of his vote for, how long did that drag on before they finally said, all right, Norm Coleman, your claims aren't panning out, and the legal proceedings are over, and it appears you've lost your recount, and that's that. And finally, Al Franken was sworn in. These things do happen from time to time. So you can very seriously do this. Have these 106 stand aside until there's a determination, and it could just take days, a determination by the House Administration Committee about what to do with these certificates that have had a cloud cast on them. And I think there's grounds, really, for saying, other people from that state who don't sign on to that suit, I don't really have anything to go on to to be concerned, no reason to be concerned with your certificate except the word of these 106 who aren't members and shouldn't be because they say their own certificates are invalid. I can't even get to the question of what they say about your certificate. They have no standing to bring a complaint. So, I don't know. I think they ought to give that some consideration. As I said, the supposed president is tweeting up a storm this morning. One of the dumb things that he's tweeting about, oh, look, and here's Mark Sumner saying it's true, his view anyway. Texas suit may be ludicrous, but it is absolutely necessary that it be met as a seditious act and punished accordingly. I have that feeling too, but I just don't know what the grounds really are for doing it based on a sedition claim. But I'll entertain anything at this point. Go ahead and make your attempt. All right, let me take a look at what Trump is up to this morning. He's had a couple of frenzied tweets, both from last night and this morning. Let's see. There was this one very recently. Oh, wow, we've already made it to our break with just all this craziness. It seems, this is the one here from about an hour ago. It says, now that the Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess for years to come. And what is he talking about here? I think he's talking about the U.S. Attorney for Delaware has somehow magically decided that Hunter Biden's taxes need to be investigated. I didn't realize, of course, that we could demand people's tax returns and investigate their tax situation. I didn't know that was true. I thought that, well, anyway, he should just say it's under audit. But at any rate, the U.S. Attorney for Delaware says that this is a necessary investigation at some point. But this here, he says, now that Biden administration will be scandal-plagued mess for years to come, it's much easier for the Supreme Court to do what he says has to be done and put him in the presidency. This, of course, is a confession that he has directed the U.S. Attorney to open this so-called investigation. Obvious. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what's going on here. Patrick Snyder sends a note along here just this very moment, via Twitter, that it may be part of our thread here. Let's see. Good. And this other thread, he says, is good and things that should be obvious here. Who are we reading here? Liliana Mason. Lily Mason, PhD, no less. Where? I don't know. Let's see. Associate professor, pardon me, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Associate professor of government and politics. Where? I don't know, but she seems to be based in Washington, D.C., but that doesn't tell us exactly, but you could look it up. But suffice to say, we will, I don't know, take her word for it on the PhD thing and move. I should just call myself PhD and be done with it. Let's see. What's the thread say? The fact that most GOP leaders don't condemn any of this, and I guess she's talking about reacting to Adam Schiff's tweet about all of these shenanigans that are going on. The fact that most GOP leaders don't condemn any of this means that we don't have a polarization problem. We have a democracy problem. Interesting. I study polarization, so she would recognize it, and I'm increasingly convinced that it's the wrong problem to address. That could be true. Let's see. The two parties are not equally extreme. I certainly feel that way as well. Most of you probably do. The fact that Dems and Republicans hate each other affective polarization, she would call that, is bad. But worse is that Republican leaders and voters are actively undermining democracy on a regular basis, and Democrats are trying to defend it. By focusing on polarization, we're avoiding the thing directly in front of us. I think this is a good insight. The Republican Party is the problem. I mean, that too is a good insight, but I think the setup is a good insight as well. Focusing on polarization might be the wrong problem. They cannot win a fair contest, and they don't need to try, in their view, because Republican voters' votes count so much more than Democratic voters' votes do, I guess, in their minds. 17% of the electorate, she reminds us, can elect a majority of the Senate, which is a problem by itself. Republicans can win a majority of the House seats with a minority of American votes. All of these imbalances benefit rural places, which are reliably Republican. Republican voters are super voters, I guess, in this sense. They are also being riled up by resentment about the limited progress that has been made in civil rights. It's funny, that makes it sound like they're upset about the progress being limited, but no, they're upset about the progress part happening at all. They are threatened by the incomplete status gains of black Americans and women. Conservative policies are not popular. They must campaign on identity threats. Interesting. Reminiscent of a lot of what we've talked about in the past. What else has she got here? Trump's PC rhetoric was about restoring the traditional social hierarchy that privileges white men and dominates everyone else. The only way to maintain this social hierarchy is to move away from democracy and toward minority white ethnic rule. This isn't accusing all Republicans of being racist. It's that most of them approve of a racist system and feel personally affronted at the idea of change. It represents a threat to their relative status in American society. We don't need to depolarize American politics. We need to democratize it, was her conclusion here. And interesting, and she makes good points, not the least of which is, again, discussing it in terms of polarization, of course, tends to disguise the asymmetrical nature of it. I mean, poles, of course, are polar opposites, and while Democrats and Republicans are in opposition to one another, again, the point that she makes here that one side is against democracy, essentially, and the other side is pro-democracy, and that one side takes it to such extremes, and the Democrats tend to shy away from such extremes. Although if you watch what the Republicans say about Democrats, and that is your cue about how to measure the actual positions of Democrats, then I guess you would get polarization, or you could come to that conclusion, and then you start writing articles about how both sides do it, and how both sides are equally wrong, and a pox on both your houses, etc., etc., and we know how wrong that can be. But, of course, I guess you could argue, well, is it really valid to say there's polarization if you are allowing one side to define both, right? We get to tell you what our position is, and we get to tell you what the Democrats' position is, and they're equally bad, which is an interesting thing for one party to say even about itself. But then if you ask the other party and they say, no, we don't endorse these things, that's not a basis from which to consider whether we're equally as bad as these other guys. These are our positions. Those are the things they say. These are the things we say about ourselves. Balance that. But yeah, the press loves it as a polarization problem, and she makes a good point to say that it isn't one. Man, let's see. Although what some of her comments reminded me of is this idea of fearing for their I was going to say socioeconomic, but let's leave the economic out of it. Their social status rings a bell, and I mean we've seen that discussed in the past. And I was just commenting on that the other day on Twitter, not so much on the show, but maybe I can bring that up. But I guess I can't remember whose comment prompted this, although I think I had seen it must have been something in the Atlantic, as I now recall, but I recall seeing that Adam Serwer had retweeted it, though it wasn't, I don't think, his own comment. It might have been drawn from this piece in the Atlantic, and I think with a little bit of scrolling I should be able to pull it up. But the basic comment was, of a similar nature, that the Republicans were here it is. Okay, so it was the Atlantic's own account tweeting it originally, and then Adam Serwer retweeting it. Republican officials aren't afraid of Trump so much as they are afraid of Republican voters, and Republican voters appear to be afraid of democracy. This is David Graham's writing in the Atlantic, and I think it's very similar to what we just heard from Liliana Mason here. And to connect the two thoughts, I will now depend on my own tweeting from yesterday, where I was saying Republican voters themselves are afraid of risking a loss. Any kind of loss freaks them out, and they're doing everything that they can to prevent the loss from being possible. Not just to reverse it and turn it into a win, but that it should be impossible going forward for them to lose. And here's what I mean. At the polls, of course, their answer to their fear of risking a loss at the polls is, well, we'll just do voter suppression to make sure that Republicans always win and Democrats can't win, or at least can't win majorities in Congress or large majorities, or that we have this institutional advantage every time, et cetera, et cetera. And if they can't do it with voter suppression, you now see that they'll try and overturn the election results in the courts so that they're guaranteed an automatic win. But this has parallels in business. I'm a small businessman, and all these things are ruining me, and all these people suing me for selling them poison. It's going to put me out of business. Well, it's supposed to. No one should be selling poison. But you see what I'm talking about here. In business, their answer to everything is tort reform. That's the label they like to hang on. In other words, it's disallowing for additional damages for emotional damages, emotional pain and stress, or capping damages in tort suits against businesses, or various immunity schemes like we see them now insisting on having immunity for businesses in the coronavirus relief packages. In other words, we don't want there to even be the possibility that anybody can start to sue us, much less actually win a suit against us. We want immunity from lawsuits for running our businesses in the middle of a pandemic, even if the government says and science says it's a bad idea. Similarly, we've talked about this a lot too, out on the street, so to speak. Their answer to their fear of the risk of loss of their own safety is stand your ground laws, which are designed not as, self-defense doctrines like, okay, if you get into a confrontation on the street somehow, like you start it or whatever, or you pretend to be a neighborhood patrol person and you stop everybody of color or who might be wearing a hoodie and say you can shake them down, whatever the situation is. They want not that they should be able to defend themselves with their weapons and then be able to have their day in court and tell everybody it was self-defense and see if they can convince a jury and thereby escape punishment for shooting or killing somebody on the street. They prefer stand your ground laws that offer an affirmative defense before the trial stage even begins. That you should be able to point to the existence of a stand your ground statute and say, I can't even be charged in this incident. It's not a crime. You can't come after me. It's a defense even from entering the criminal justice system, not just being able to successfully navigate it. And they go even further. Like now, after these protests during the summer, some states were considering, and I suppose, I don't even know, I didn't track whether people actually passed any of these, but they wanted to pass laws making it legal for people to run over protesters who block the streets. You should be able to run them down with your car and just like stand your ground, not have to answer for it even at arraignment, and not be charged for any of these crimes. They're looking for legal constructs that will block them from ever having to answer for any of their actions. So it happens all across, every aspect of life for these people. They're extraordinarily afraid. And I thought that was sort of an interesting thought, that this is everything they're doing. And I guess what makes it so astonishing and ironic is that what they're doing, of course, is rigging everything. Oh, this election is rigged because we didn't win. I know that it's rigged because I've been trying to rig it this whole time, and it hasn't been working out for me. So you must also be rigging it because, of course, polarization and everything's opposite. If I'm trying to rig it, you're trying to rig it. So, yeah. Again, we find ourselves right back in the same spot, I suppose. But, I don't know. It's fairly amazing. I mentioned that Trump was particularly unhinged this morning. I just saw that his last tweet, again, it's a morning full of crazy, but the one I just saw last was, he tweets, "Now it turns out that the Democrats want to pack the court," and he's capitalizing at random at this point, "pack the court with 26 justices." Has anybody heard the mention of 26 justices? I'd just be interested in where he got the number from. I'm sure he saw it on OAN, and I guess they just made it up. But okay, it goes on to say, "This would be terrible and must be stopped. Even Justice RBG was strongly opposed." Didn't oppose expanding to 26 justices, of course, because no one ever mentioned that. But I can only assume he's still steroid drunk from his Regeneron treatment, which, by the way, I understand there's news that Rudy has gotten the cocktail. And I suppose that, we'll see whether it works the same way it did for everybody else to whom Trump has granted it. But we are now over 82,000 dead, waiting on his October 8th promise of free Regeneron for all, and over 8.2 million new infections. And by the way, interesting confluence of the numbers there. You happen to notice that there, what is that? Are we 1% of the? Let's see. I got to do the math on that. What's that? 82,000 is 10% of 820,000. Then yeah. So okay. So 1% of the people who have of new infections that have been detected have died, waiting on this stupid Regeneron promise, which I guess we all let slide because everybody knows that everything that Donald Trump promises is a lie. But again, I still think that this is just particularly egregious as people are dying at these numbers. And by the way, Worldometers, if they haven't done it already, will be putting us over the 300,000 dead mark this morning. And of course, that'll probably by the end of the show have caught us up to the equivalent of the entire population of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, being killed by the coronavirus. I don't know whether that's going to help anything sink in or not. And of course, I guess we'll probably reach this mark a little bit earlier than I thought. But again, the total losses to the coronavirus in these 9 months that we've been dealing with the pandemic here in the United States now equal to approximately 3/4 of all the combat losses in 4 years of World War II. Just, a little note to take with you as this idiot now takes his case to the Supreme Court, saying everybody wants me to continue being president and continue forgetting to buy vaccine, and then promising that it will come before the election, and then blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't. Well, okay. So, yes, I think that's bizarre and crazy. And let's see, is he... no, I think he's given up on the tweeting for a little while, although it takes him a long time sometimes to click these things out. There was the confession that we ended the last segment with that obviously now lays it all out. Obviously, we probably suspected that he was directing the U.S. Attorney for Delaware to open up this investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes, but the play is now laid bare. Now that the Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess, because I am attempting to create the impression that it's a scandal-plagued mess because you caught me trying to create that impression by asking the Ukrainians to create that impression for us, and they wouldn't do it, and now I've had to prevail on our own U.S. attorneys to do it. And wouldn't you know that the tweet immediately prior to the one about the scandal-plagued mess claim says, now it turns out that my phone call to the president of Ukraine, which many, including me, have called perfect, was even better than that, which is, of course, impossible. But I predicted Biden corruption, said to call the AG, who perhaps knew of the corruption during the impeachment hoax, ? I don't even know exactly what the hell he's trying to mean here. But what he's trying to say is, stupidly enough, he's actually making the connection for us that we, just reached on our own. He's saying that the call to the president of Ukraine was not only perfect in asking for help with investigating the Bidens, but that he was, quote unquote, right in suspecting the Bidens. And his proof of his rightness is that now the U.S. Attorney for Delaware, who reports to him, has somehow magically, independently, and without any interference from me whatsoever, decided to investigate Hunter Biden and his taxes. And so therefore my call to Zelensky was amazingly prescient. I knew there was something wrong with this guy. All I had to do was make enough perfect phone calls in a row to actually find somebody who would feel beholden to me and launch this investigation. And lo and behold, I have finally found that person in the U.S. Attorney for Delaware. But of course, this is, of course, an obvious setup and, self-referential. And you can't just say, of course I was right. Here's the proof that I was right. It's me saying that I'm right. Well, okay, that doesn't actually work. Let's see. Rebecca Romans has a theory about why 26 members of the Supreme Court. And her answer is that that's the number of Big Macs that he ate this week. And I don't know that there's a logical connection there, but it sounds funny and we ought to say it. All right. It's just, I don't know, wild and crazy out there. Let's see. Moving on to a couple other items for your consideration. Here's another, a related item of craziness, and it's not Trump. So maybe you're craving a non-Trump crazy person. Note here from Roger Hake, who had shared this information with us earlier about Lauren Culp. Did we read it on the? I'm pretty sure we made some mention of it. But Lauren Culp, the candidate for governor in Washington, was that it? And he got crushed by 500,000 votes or something, but took up the Trump line that there was massive voter fraud and he totally won and they should just put him in as governor. And everybody was astonished that this was happening, but not paying much attention to it. But like Trump, he also is grifting off of this thing, which is also amazing just because I don't know how you get people to contribute. But I guess it's a indication of how far gone Trump types are. I can, it's easy to imagine them being caught up in the excitement of trying to support what the purported president of the United States is up to. And for all his faults, for whatever reason, they find Trump to be a charismatic figure. But I don't see the same in Lauren Culp. And I can't imagine even in Washington there being that much interest in helping him challenge things. But apparently there is. Culp has raised $208,000 since October 27th, which maybe is that a filing deadline in Washington or something, and has paid himself $48,000 of that money, and also paid his consultant another $20,000. This from which I got an email from Roger from the Washington Observer, a Substack, one of those Substack newsletters. But Paul Query, Queary, the author of this one, and I wonder what kind of money he's making off of this. Everybody wants in on Substack. Lauren Culp's failed campaign for governor has raised more than $208,000 since October 27th, which is pretty much about when we started, figuring out who won the election. There's not a whole lot of time between October 27th and November 3rd, so a good portion of that $200,000 has to come after his shellacking. He's paid himself more than $48,000 out of that, and $20,000 to his consultant Christopher Gergen, according to the campaign's latest filing with the Public Disclosure Commission. Gergen on Thursday also announced in a Facebook Live, well, I guess that we've sort of made that the whole now, a Facebook Live. Okay. That it was, I guess the campaign, was going to go to court to challenge the results of the election in several counties. The statewide results were certified last week by Secretary of State Kim Wyman. Not clear that anything had actually been filed in terms of lawsuit. Culp, who emerged from a weak Republican field in the August primary, lost the election to incumbent Democratic Governor Jay Inslee by more than 500,000 votes. But Culp has refused to concede. It is interesting here, this reads, but the Culp has refused to concede. And I don't know whether people, that'd be an interesting nickname, the Culp, like the culprit, I guess. But I think it's just a typo. But again, these Substack things, people pay for these Substack things. I think you should edit and proofread them if you're asking people to pay. Anyway, the Culp, I'll just use that, has refused to concede. And he and Gergen have essentially turned the campaign into a money-making exercise, like Substack. Nobody's at fault for starting a Substack newsletter. I'm not blaming you. I don't know. I'm poking fun, yes, but that's because I'm not raising the same amount of money as you, and I'm jealous of you. Most of the money reported on Thursday was raised in the days immediately before the election. But nearly 600 people reached into their wallets between Election Day and November 30th, giving more than $55,000 of that $200,000. So, very interesting. Late money like that tends not to go anywhere, even if you give it before the election. But okay, I'm not going to turn off the late election money spigots, especially in the age of litigation like this and recounts and post-election litigation. Late money can pay for that, and I don't want to turn off that spigot. All right, well, pretty remarkable. There's considerably more to it, but I think we just wanted to sort of bring your attention to the fact that there are minor league grifts going on with this stuff all the time, and Trump is inspiring everybody to steal, I suppose. Let's see. Where are we with this one here? Shall we dive into this one here? The Trump warns Georgia Attorney General not to rally other Republicans against Texas's lawsuit. Just another interesting story on the Republican schism that this is causing. And I think that was something that Greg sent to me after his segment ended yesterday, just to sort of add that to the roundup. And did he also send me this one? Or no, perhaps not. This might have come from out of Greg Sargent's tweeting about the subject, but he wrote on this, and I guess the previous article too. So a Greg sent it to me, just not the Greg that we were thinking of. Trump warns Georgia AG not to rally other Republicans against Texas lawsuit. And Greg Sargent's piece here, a GOP senator reveals just how deranged many in his party have become. And I guess the senator he has in mind is Pat Toomey, Republican, obviously, of Pennsylvania. He says, has done something truly extraordinary. He has now stated in unequivocal terms that it's unacceptable for his fellow Republicans to try to subvert the will of American voters and keep President Trump in power illegitimately. Why have so few other Republicans proved willing to take this simple step? Toomey's declaration contrasts sharply with a new development in the Georgia runoffs. Republicans Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue just announced their support for a deranged lawsuit filed by Texas. Good. So we do have two Republican senators on board with that one, that seeks to overturn popular vote outcomes in 4 battleground states that Trump lost, although they didn't sign on to the amicus brief. But and that makes a small difference. Anyway, those Georgia moves capture a broader state of affairs. It appears that untold numbers of elected Republicans are trying to inspire in GOP voters a state of what you might call permanent warfare against our democratic institutions and the opposition's voters alike. This war footing doesn't permit acknowledgement of the opposition's claims to legitimate political representation. It treats efforts at the wholesale subversion of unwanted electoral outcomes as an acceptable tool of political competition. This is what Toomey's new declaration throws into sharp relief. It's completely unacceptable, Toomey told the Philadelphia Inquirer, referring to Trump's efforts to get numerous GOP-controlled state legislatures to appoint pro-Trump electors, and also, well, the Texas situation as well. This all in defiance of the state's popular vote outcome. The president should give up trying to get legislatures to overturn the results of the elections in their respective states. Toomey continued. Compounding the heresy on display here, Toomey even dared to reveal that he had personally congratulated President-elect Biden on his victory in a conversation Toomey described as pleasant. And then on to the various Republicans who support Trump's efforts. But I guess Loeffler and Perdue, whether they win or lose, will not be on hand on January 6th to deal with the electoral vote count. But again, here's another situation where they are weirdly put in the spot of having to attack their own, not only their own statewide office holders down in Georgia, but their own, the validity of the election that has landed them in this runoff. I mean, hey, maybe it's the case that that Ossoff and Warnock both cleared 50% and have won the seats outright, but for all of the shenanigans that are going on. But who knows? But another, I guess, if their election runoff was earlier, I would say that these two would have to stand aside from taking the oath on January 3rd and not be able to take their seats in the Senate until their strange claims were fully litigated or investigated by the appropriate Senate committee. But okay, the fact that their runoff election date is far too late to make any damn sense whatsoever saves us from having to decide what to do with the two of them on January 6th. They just won't have counted their votes or certified their elections by that point. All right, I think there was something else I wanted to parse out of that Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece about Trump pressuring the Georgia AG. We'll see if we can find that during our 1-minute break and return after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Just sort of curious about what's happening here. Happened to peek in on a conversation happening via Twitter. You know what? I think we've already been over this ground here, so I think I will leave that one aside. Can't get involved in every interesting conversation, I suppose. So let's see. There's not much more, I don't think, to... I can't recall, anyway, what we might have wanted to parse out of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece here, except that, once again, Trump conducting all of his business by phone, more perfect phone calls, discussion in here of a 15-minute phone call. Let's see. Trump warned Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr not to rally other Republican officials against a long-shot Texas lawsuit seeking to toss out the state's election results. That would be Georgia's election results. According to several people with direct knowledge of the conversation, the roughly 15-minute phone call late Tuesday came shortly before Loeffler and Perdue issued a joint statement saying they fully support the improbable lawsuit, asking the U.S. Supreme Court to reject election results in Georgia and 3 other battleground states that Trump lost. Gets back down to 4 here. Earlier in the day, Carr's office called the lawsuit by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton constitutionally, legally, and factually wrong. The complaint asks the justices to delay the Monday deadline for certification of presidential electors in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Wrong terminology here. Monday deadline for certification. I don't even know what they're talking about. I guess that's when the Electoral College votes. So I guess technically there's sort of a ghost deadline there. Like obviously you would have certified your presidential electors so that they can show up and vote in the Electoral College, but the real deadline for avoiding, who knows? I was going to say the real deadline for avoiding these problems is, of course, Safe Harbor Day, which was on the 8th. But apparently there's no such thing as safe harbor anymore, because here we are having these problems regardless of safe harbor, although it's possible that the court may eventually just say, no, the safe harbor provision prevails here. There's no challenges permitted after this thing. I don't think they'll go this far. That's not even a really sensible position, but you are allowed to draw those lines if you want to. And all right, it's been drawn, and I guess we'll live with it. But it's not working. I guess this is what the Republicans are always mad about when they want things like stand your ground laws. We were told that there was a safe harbor protection available to us, and yet we are caught up in litigation. What's the deal? Well, the answer is that the protection you have is the ability to go to court and say, safe harbor, Your Honor, and have the judge say, you're right. The danger they're worried about is showing up in court and saying, well, safe harbor, Your Honor, and a judge who's crazy because they're appointing crazy judges who they expect to do this for them. And so therefore, it must be the case, thanks to polarization, that there are Democratic judges equally willing to do equally crazy things for Democrats. I guess this goes back to, the reason for a phone call like this to Georgia or to any of the other state officials or the state legislatures that the president's been making. And he's astonished to find out that when he gets a Republican on the other end of the phone, they won't commit crimes for him, because that's what I thought political parties were all about. I thought that they were organized crime families, and I'm the boss of the Republican organized crime family. I'm asking you to commit this crime. I'm ordering you to commit this crime. And the fact that you won't do it is astonishing to me. The Democrats do it, right? Well, they don't. But they said we were polarized. That's the problem with that language. They said we were polarized, and that means, logically speaking, that if I'm willing to do this, they're willing to do this. And I'm only willing to do this because I know they're willing to do it. They started it. I don't have no proof that they ever started it, and I've never seen them do it. But I just feel in my bones that they are doing it. So therefore, we should be doing it too. They actually kind of work like that. But this particular perfect phone call is really interesting. I mean, it shouldn't surprise anyone. I'm sure it doesn't surprise anyone that Trump is calling the attorney general in Georgia to say, don't undermine the Texas lawsuit. And he's doing it because the Texas lawsuit is filed by a loyal Republican, and it's aimed at putting me back in office. And you're a Republican. I need you to do the Republican thing. Help me commit this crime. But realize, it should be facially obvious, but it bears stating that what he's doing here is Georgia is a defendant in this lawsuit. The Georgia Attorney General presumably has a responsibility to defend Georgia's position in this lawsuit. Georgia's being sued by Texas. Donald Trump has just called Georgia and said, would you please don't say anything bad about Texas's lawsuit against you so that you lose the lawsuit against you. He's asking us, please don't appear in court and defend yourself against this lawsuit so that I can win by default. Again, I want to rig the outcome. I don't want to risk leaving it up to the Supreme Court, as though they were to actually take the case, to decide. Because what happens if, John Roberts is all interested in, the legacy of the court and protecting the integrity of the judicial branch. And of course we can't entertain this suit. It's too stupid to breathe. And we can't accept this case and continue to call ourselves a legitimate court. So we just can't. That means Trump will lose. The only way, I guess, Trump could possibly win it is if he then convinces Georgia and every other defendant state not to defend itself, and then calls John Roberts and says, you have to take this case because none of the state defendants are offering a defense. They're all demurring to this claim from Texas. So you got to rule on it, which even that would still not be true. But I'm sure in his mind it is. But yeah, so another perfect phone call just to rig the outcome of this case about rigging the outcome of the elections, and then all the while complaining that it's the Democrats doing all the rigging. It's really kind of amazing. Well, anyway, let's see. Is there more to read here? I mean, this is kind of astonishing. Let's see. So earlier in the day, Carr's office, that's the Attorney General in Georgia, called the lawsuit by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton constitutionally, legally, and factually wrong. And that got Trump mad, I guess. The complaint asks the justices to delay the Monday deadline. Right, okay, as we got past that part. The two men spoke at the urging of Perdue. So David Perdue says, Trump, you should call Carr and tell him not to defend Georgia's position on this lawsuit while I run for senator from Georgia. Amazing. So the two men spoke at the urging of Perdue, who, along with Loeffler, also received calls from Trump about Carr's opposition to the lawsuit, according to three Republican officials, two of whom described Trump as furious in his call with Loeffler over the Attorney General's stance. I'm sorry, but again, what the F does he expect the Attorney General of Georgia to do with this thing? I guess in his mind, whatever, be a Republican, and somehow it doesn't seem odd to him that a defendant to a lawsuit would just quit. But then again, I mean, Trump has ordered the Solicitor General in the past to refuse to defend the position of the United States in various lawsuits so that he could rig the outcome of lawsuits over policies with which he personally politically disagrees. So he's into that kind of manipulation. It's just, I guess Georgia is Georgia, and you're not the president of Georgia. You're not the chief executive of Georgia. You're the president of the United States. But I guess, again, in Trump's mind, everything's hierarchical. I'm a Republican. He's a Republican. He has to listen to me. I'm the higher ranking Republican. And of course, we know he's a believer in the magical powers of the presidency. And of course, Georgia has to subvert itself to the United States and the orders of the president of the United States. It's just a state, and I'm the president of the United States. I'm super powerful. I've seen it in all the movies. All right, so Perdue says you should talk. He's furious and is basically, so what? He first calls Perdue, I guess, and Loeffler, and says, what the hell with this Carr guy? Can't you make him stop? Well, he's the Attorney General of Georgia. Yeah, and you're the senator from Georgia. You outrank him. Well, I'm a federal official. He's a state official. He doesn't really answer to me. I represent Georgia in the federal government, but I'm not like the king, and we're not the king and queen of Georgia. We're just two senators from Georgia. But again, Trump, that senator, that's powerful. That's high ranking. It's federal. Federal's higher than state. You should be able to order him around. He probably sees it that way in his mind. Minutes after Trump and Carr hung up, the two senators issued a joint statement proclaiming their support for the Paxton lawsuit. This isn't hard and it isn't partisan. It's American. It is partisan and it's un-American, but that's what the senators had to say about their own stupid action. No one should ever have to question the integrity of our election system, like we're doing, and the credibility of its outcomes, which is what we're doing. A person on the call between Trump and Carr described it as cordial. Interesting. He's furious with Perdue and Loeffler, screaming at them on the phone, and they're doing everything he says. Carr won't do any of the things he says, but he's cordial on the phone with him. That's interesting dynamic. A person on the call said it was cordial. Trump told Carr that he's, quote, heard great things. That's so Trump. I've heard great things about you. You haven't. But that he's picked up word. I'm hearing that Carr is calling other attorneys general and urging them to stand against the Texas challenge. Carr told him that wasn't true, but I'm sure Trump didn't believe it. Earlier Wednesday, Trump asked the U.S. Supreme Court to let him join the lawsuit challenging the election results, which repeats false and unsubstantiated allegations about mail-in ballots and the voting process in Georgia and the other states. But remember, again, this is sort of one of those, they're trying to create original jurisdiction for the Supreme Court by having this be a suit between two states, but everybody wants in on the action because, they'll cling to anything, and it's like, well, the president isn't the state, neither are you 106, but I guess you can always file an amicus brief and say, I'm not joining the suit, but I am letting people know that I have a theory that I think it's important the court hear about this suit. Now, it isn't important, and their theory is dumb, but there's no convincing them of that. So, fine. All right. Well, although, technically speaking, if he's saying join the lawsuit, he wants to join as a plaintiff party in this suit. And, I'm not certain whether that alone would destroy the original jurisdiction, although that would be funny. All right, you can join it. And now it's not a suit between states anymore. It's a suit between some states, but also an individual. And therefore, we don't have original jurisdiction, and you're dismissed for being in the wrong forum. But we'll see whether it gets to that. So let's see. Earlier Wednesday, Trump asked the U.S. Supreme Court to let him join the lawsuit. Now, I'm curious even how he did that. Like, did they file paperwork seeking to do it, or did he call John Roberts and say, I want to join. Let me join, whatever that means. My lawyers say they want to join. Join me. All right, well, let's see. It's the latest in a series of extraordinary attempts by Trump to overturn his narrow defeat to Biden. Wasn't really that narrow at all. I don't know what they're talking about. I guess the narrow defeat to Biden in Georgia, perhaps, could save that sentence. Otherwise, it's garbage. Let's see. His narrow defeat, which made him the first Republican White House hopeful to lose the state. Yes, Georgia, since 1992. Okay, that saves it. The president dialed up Governor Brian Kemp. I love how phone-oriented he is. I mean, that's the way you're going to have to do this business. You can't just keep flying to Georgia and meeting with them. That'd even be more suspicious, plus a waste of time and money and pollutants. But anyway, dialed up Kemp on Saturday and demanded during a lengthy phone call that he summon state lawmakers to the Capitol for a special session to overturn his defeat. At his Valdosta rally that evening, Trump said he was, quote, ashamed of the Republican he endorsed in 2018 and urged U.S. Representative Doug Collins to challenge him in a 2022 primary. Kemp and other state Republican leaders have previously rejected Trump's demands to call a special legislative session, warning that any attempt to change election laws before the runoffs would result in endless litigation. On the phone call, he told the president his opposition hadn't changed and he was following the state law by certifying their results. State elections officials have repeatedly said there's no widespread evidence of election fraud, or really evidence of widespread election fraud is really what they should be saying. But okay, I'll accept that the evidence isn't widespread either. And a series of lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and its allies in Georgia and other states have been rejected by the courts. After a third tally, Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger certified election results that showed Biden won the state by roughly 12,000 votes. That's the narrow thing they were talking about. The president has also vented his fury at Raffensperger and Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who've each acknowledged Biden's victory and urged Republicans to focus on the January 5th runoffs rather than his election grievances. Even as those Georgia Republicans defy Trump's calls to undo the election, Loeffler and Perdue have worked carefully not to antagonize him ahead of the January votes to determine control of the Senate. Though neither has repeated his false claim of a stolen election, Loeffler wouldn't answer that question in Sunday's debate. They've also sought to appease Trump by calling for Raffensperger's resignation. Trump, meanwhile, has also sought to reverse his defeat outside the legal system, including by encouraging Georgia lawmakers to demand a special session of the Republican-controlled legislature to grant the state's 16 electoral votes to him. A push by 4 Georgia Senate Republicans to petition Kemp to call the session went nowhere, but 16 state senators, about half of the Republican caucus, endorsed the Texas lawsuit filed by Paxton, who is battling whistleblower allegations that he engaged in bribery, by the way. They issued a statement claiming that a systemic failure to follow the law has allowed misconduct, fraud, and irregularities throughout the voting process of the state without citing substantiated evidence that's withstood court scrutiny. Georgia Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Fuchs said the conspiracy theories in the lawsuit are false and irresponsible. Texas alleges that there are 80,000 forged signatures on absentee ballots in Georgia, but they don't bring forward a single person who this happened to, she said. That's because it didn't happen. Oh, okay. Well, note for the record, Jordan Fuchs goes by she. I did not know that, and it hasn't come up yet. So, okay. I hope I can remember that going forward. And that's the end of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece here. It is kind of extraordinary what they're doing, and the position that Georgia Republicans find themselves in. Anyway, man, it's getting crazy out there. What else did I want to share with you? There's so much here that we haven't gotten to. Let's see. There was an interesting... Oh, yes. Well, I'll be able to share with you a New York Times article establishing the fact that I blurted out earlier that, yes, Rudy Giuliani, as it says here in the subheader for this piece, Rudy Giuliani became the latest in President Trump's inner circle to boast about the treatment he received for COVID-19 as hospitals across the country ration care. I really thought that there was some chance that Trump might not give the treatment to Rudy Giuliani because Giuliani keeps losing all these cases, and it would be like very Trumpy to say, screw him, let him die from COVID. And I'd support him in that decision. But he went ahead and gave it to him. I don't know word whether he gave it to Jenna Ellis or not. Ellis, by the way, I think this is the second time she's contracted COVID, according to some reports that I've seen. No word on whether she's getting this antibody therapy or not. But the piece, the headline in the New York Times is Trump and friends got coronavirus care many others couldn't. That, of course, extraordinarily relevant to the whole point, really, of my keeping the tally of the number of people who have gotten sick and or died waiting for him to deliver on this promise. But a lengthy article in the New York Times about that. And might give us some more factual background. I know I mentioned to you the other day that the FDA has, in fact, I think, given the emergency use authorization to this product, and that I guess that authorization comes on the back of some early trials. So there are some people out there getting it, whether they're getting it for free, I don't know. They might be getting it for free because the developers of the treatment are looking for volunteers to do their testing with. But, whether or not we'll see it distributed for free following FDA approval, I have no idea. And neither does Trump, and he doesn't really care about actually fulfilling that promise. Anyway, some interesting detail, I'm sure, to be discovered in that piece that I'll share with you in the roundup of today's show. Let's see. A couple of things that we just missed out on and that are no longer hot news items, but let's see. Interesting thread on the theory under which the Wisconsin Kraken lawsuit was smacked down and dismissed. Let's see. Oh, and did we mention? I don't know if we did. That this NBC News report, speaking of Giuliani and his COVID bout, after Giuliani visit Michigan House, says nearly 30 tested positive for COVID this year. So it's a very confusing and I think misleading headline, and I think they were looking for clicks. I'll give them the clicks. But just a weird construction here. I don't know under what circumstances they issued a report from the Michigan House saying how many members have tested positive for COVID this year. But I guess the real coincidence here is that the report comes out at the end of the year, but just after Giuliani visited them. And I think their intention here, obviously, is to make everybody believe that Giuliani showed up and gave 30 members of the Michigan House COVID, but that's not, I don't think, what happened here. Let's see. The chamber reported the numbers a week after Rudy Giuliani testified in Lansing and just days after he tested positive for COVID-19. Doha Madani reporting here on the December 9th for NBC News. Almost 30 staffers and members, so even more misleading, honestly, of the Michigan House of Representatives have contracted the coronavirus this year, Speaker's office said on Wednesday, a week after Giuliani testified, maskless, in the chamber. They actually gave him the chamber. And 3 days after it was announced that he had tested positive for COVID-19, about 8 representatives and 21 staffers, totally different from what the headline seems to say, have reported testing positive so far. Let's see, that according to, spokesperson Gideon DeSandro. DeSandro would not detail the timing of the infections, and it was unclear if any of the positive cases came after Giuliani's visit. So even more misleading. But I don't know. I found it intriguing, and I think that was the reason we left it out of our roundup yesterday. It was just so misleading. But now it's just interesting as as a weird story. Like, why the need to do this? And not only NBC News, but a lot of places went with this 30 House members after Giuliani visits construction. And it's really just not true. And it's worrisome because it's from sources that we would otherwise, I think, treat as relatively credible. But all right, always a good warning to read down into the body of the story, even though here the subheader seemed to give it away. I think they felt guilty about it and put it in the subheader. But anyway, yeah, I don't even know whether this story, I don't think it's long enough to actually clear up all the questions I would have had about this. But suffice to say that it doesn't look, in fact, like 30 members of the House certainly have tested positive. It's 8, and they may all have been positive before Giuliani ever showed up. Just thought I'd put that one out there on the record. Sometimes people screw things up in the quest for clicks. Let's see. Oh, yeah, here's an interesting tidbit, and this one I think we probably ought to bring up. Saw this tweet the other day. Edward Wong, the diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, making an excellent point, I thought, embedding a screenshot of a Trump tweet from, I guess, earlier that day, and what happened to that Trump tweet, which was of interest to him. Trump tweets, if somebody cheated in the election, which the Democrats did, the projection is amazing. Why wouldn't the election be immediately overturned? How can a country be run like this? And of course, this too is just indulgent of his fantasies about the way elections work, about the powers of the presidency, about the way the courts work and the power of the courts. You know, in his mind, we've demonstrated the Democrats cheated. Why won't the courts say, well, if the Democrats cheated, then the obvious solution is that Republicans should be declared the winner. But remember that even if he was right, even if the Democrats had in fact cheated in the election, it's not necessarily the case that the remedy the court would settle on is, all right, well then we'll declare, well, one of the other parties that contested this race to be the winner. Remember, there are other parties out there, for one thing. But also, it doesn't settle the issue. I mean, you would be able to, I guess, some court could, after lengthy investigation, say, all right, well, let's see. The Democrats in this case won 100,000 votes, and the Republicans won 90,000 votes. But it is alleged by the Republicans, and let's say in this hypothetical, proven that 11,000 of the did I get that right? 90,000 and 100,000. Yeah. So 11,000 of the votes cast for Democrats were somehow fraudulent, and so we throw them out. That means that the Republican got 90,000 votes and the Democrat got 89,000 votes, and therefore the Republican is the winner. That's one possible outcome. Of course, given the way that the cheating was alleged to have happened, you would have to say, well, that's an incomplete conclusion. Were there any ballots cast for the Republican that were invalid? We need to know that, and we haven't asked that question. But Trump would never ask that question. He assumes all the Republican votes are valid. That's a dumb and childlike approach to things. We know he's dumb and childlike. But anyway, this isn't Edward Wong's point. It's my own. But I do think it's important. I want to unpack this part too, right? Now, keep in mind, for instance, the answer to this, to Trump's own question, if somebody cheated in the election with which the Democrats did, why wouldn't the election be immediately overturned? Well, the results might be thrown out. I mean, if anything, a court would probably say, well, we'll throw out the results and call for an additional, new balloting, a revote. That's a possibility, but a remote one. But I do remind Trump and everybody else, there was a time, of course, when there was cheating in the election that was found and was very obvious and announced by the authorities. And I don't know whether I don't even remember whether it went to court or not, but you remember the North Carolina 9th District primary race between the two Republicans. And we found out after the general election, or prior to the general election, actually, that the the primary had been tainted by vote harvesting with absentee ballots, all the things that Trump says he's worried about. And that never resulted in simply having a court say, well, yeah, that's proven, and so poof, the Democrat is the winner. I mean, why not? The Republicans cheated in that election. They cheated early on in that election. I guess one outcome could be that they just nominate the other person. But that wasn't the outcome. That's not what courts do with these things. But, well, okay. Hang on until the other side of the break to find out what Edward Wong had to say. Remember, he's the diplomatic reporter for the New York Times, so he's going to be taking a slightly different approach to what Trump had to say in this tweet. See if you can figure out what it is before we get back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Did you guess? I don't know. I didn't drop enough hints probably, but again, Edward Wong, the diplomatic reporter for the New York Times, what would his interest be besides, hey, the President of the United States is crazy that Trump has tweeted this thing? Well, the screenshot reveals the answer. Maybe you cheated yourself and looked it up during the break. Donald Trump's tweet, if somebody cheated in the election, which the Democrats did, why wouldn't the election be immediately overturned? How can a country be run like this? The country sucks, right? Who has retweeted Donald Trump's stupid tweet about how the country sucks and is run so terribly? Lots of people did. In fact, 16,000 people did by the time that Edward Wong had taken this screenshot. And one of them was the Twitter account of the Chinese embassy in the U.S. How interesting. They may even agree there in the Chinese embassy that the elections are ridiculous and how can a country be run like this and what a stupid country and it sucks. Edward Wong, putting it a little more gently because he is, after all, diplomatic in his reporting. This is notable and a key marker for those who say Trump's actions help China. The Chinese embassy in the U.S. has retweeted Trump's fake claim of election fraud. For autocrats, Trump is helping delegitimize democracy. He's helping delegitimize democracy and eroding U.S. standing. Putin has repeated his arguments too. Nothing could be better. And of course, Putin has repeated his arguments. It's Putin's hope that all of this will help undermine American democracy. But from a diplomatic standpoint, I mean, Secretary of State Pompeo continues to run around insisting that this is still true, that the United States is a shining beacon for democracy around the world, and that we demand blah, 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 et cetera, and all the rest of them adopt that most American system of democracy. We fought a big war in Iraq so that we could dye everybody's finger purple so that they could vote, which doesn't even work and is stupid, and how can a country be run like this is what we've come to in the span of, 10 years. How amazing. And, that's going to undermine us for some time to come. And it was always Putin's hope that it would. So, good observation. And it could easily have slipped by in the torrent of crazy. So, I'm glad he brought it up. All right, let's see. What else? Here's a story that might otherwise have escaped our notice. Where did I see that? How did the provenance of this one? From a tweet from Matthew Petty, Petti, freelance journalist, and is an intern at the Quincy Institute, with which I am not familiar, but tweeting an observation on an interesting story in a publication called responsible statecraft. Not something that Donald Trump subscribes to, but of course not. And of course, the report is about how irresponsible Donald Trump's statecraft has been. This Matthew tweets, new, the Trump administration just admitted to Congress that it pushed for Delta Crescent Energy, a company founded, of course, by Republican donors, to get the only U.S.-approved deal for Syrian oil. How about that? The admission confirms an earlier investigation by, he refers to the Twitter handle of Zach Coplin, who is an investigator and investigative reporter for Government Accountability Project, I think is the Twitter handle I'm reading here. This, though, from Responsible Statecraft. And there's more. That's now become a thread with lots of other links. Let's read through the thread and read Matthew's comments here. It's important to note that the Syrian Kurds want to work with foreign oil companies. They need technical expertise to prevent ecological disaster. Now, our technical expertise in preventing ecological oil disasters is not great, but okay. U.S. sanctions, however, mean that the Trump administration gets to choose who these Kurds will deal with, and it's not transparent. This time, referring to the, reporting of the AL Monitor, or Al Monitor? What is it? It's the Middle Eastern focused publication in English. So I'm not certain exactly of what the pronunciation of the name is. There's a third tweet here in this thread. Delta Crescent Energy is not the only small firm to try to deal with Syrian oil, but they're the only ones with the political clout to actually get permission. And link here to something from Reason magazine, the madcap scheme to take Syria's oil. I don't know how old that piece is. It's a current one. Okay, so it's specifically the madcap part is this rush to make sure that the contracts go to Republican donors. I think I put aside the responsible statecraft piece on it. Might be interesting to read all the rest too, so I'll give you the thread as well. Trump administration helped GOP donors get Syria oil deal. Matthew Petty is the author of this piece in Responsible Statecraft, so self-referential, but I'm okay with it in that sense. The State Department's special envoy for Syria, he reports, at a congressional hearing on Wednesday, admitted to helping Republican donors score a deal for Syrian oil. Senator Lindsey Graham, amazing, first announced in July that U.S.-backed Kurdish-led forces had granted an American company a deal to modernize the oil fields in the areas of northeastern Syria guarded by U.S. troops. Special Envoy Joel Rayburn confirmed during Wednesday's House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing that the company is Delta Crescent Energy, a little-known firm co-founded by several people who have donated to Republican causes, including Graham's own campaign. Gee whiz. Is David Perdue getting in on this or not? Rayburn also admitted that the Trump administration had actually pushed for Delta Crescent Energy and no other companies to receive permission to exploit Syrian oil. We didn't lobby anyone for the deal, Rayburn said, but we've met with members of that company, with local authorities, with Iraqi Kurdish officials, Nechirvan Barzani. I didn't know until now that it was Barzani all along. The New Republic had first reported on the meeting several months ago, so I would have known, and so would Don Corleone if he had read the New Republic. I guess we've both made the same mistake. Rayburn also said that the State Department issued foreign policy guidance, quote, foreign policy guidance, after which the U.S. Treasury granted a special sanctions exemption for Delta Crescent Energy. Did you discuss deals for any other American companies? Asked Representative Joaquin Castro of Texas. Not that I was involved in, Rayburn responded. The Syrian Kurdish-led autonomous authorities in northeastern Syria that control the oil fields in conjunction with the U.S. forces have expressed their desire to work with multiple foreign companies. Americans are currently banned from dealing with Syrian oil under U.S. economic sanctions on Syria, and Delta Crescent Energy is the only firm known to have been granted an exemption to the sanctions by the U.S. Treasury. It is unclear how much work on Syria's oil fields Delta Crescent Energy has actually completed. Syrian Kurdish General Mazloum Kobani told Al Monitor, again, AL, like Al Monitor. I guess they just gave it sort of an Arabic sounding name. Al Monitor last month that talks about exporting the oil were advancing slowly. Delta Crescent Energy was founded by U.S. Army Delta Force veteran James Reese. So everything he works in now has to be called Delta something. Former diplomat James Kane and former Gulf Sands Petroleum executive John P. Dorrier Jr. The firm is well connected to both Republican circles and the U.S. military. Kane is a longtime Republican activist who served on the Republican National Committee from 2003 to 2005. He's donated at least $30,681 to Republican causes since 2003. That's not a huge amount, but more than I've got to donate. According to FEC records, Dorrier has donated $6,947. That's not much either. To Republican causes since 2016, including a $500 donation to Graham's campaign in 2019. Dorrier's only pre-2016 political donation listed in the FEC filings is $500 to the Republican National Senatorial Committee in 2005. It's not a whole lot. Reese now runs a controversial private security firm, that might be more interesting, called Tiger Swan, which is some kind of name. All right. Tiger Swan first rose into prominence in 2016 when it helped suppress Native American and environmental protests against an oil pipeline in North Dakota. That may ring a bell for many of you. The firm recently settled a lawsuit for operating without a license in North Dakota. Do you even need it? And is embroiled in an alleged bribery scheme in Pennsylvania. That's where the real donations are being made, although it denies all wrongdoing. So there you go. Tiger Swan has also been active in Syria, helping guard U.S.-backed demining operations in the city of Raqqa, according to a 2018 report from the New Yorker. The Department of Defense acknowledged but has not yet responded to a FOIA request filed by this reporter in September to obtain Tiger Swan's contract. Syria's oil became a priority for the Trump administration in October of 2019 when Trump declared his desire to withdraw from Syria, but take the oil. The Trump administration had convinced Syrian Kurdish forces to destroy their fortifications along the border with Turkey, promising that a U.S.-led peacekeeping force would protect the area. Then Trump reversed course in October 2019, making the Turks enormously happy, I'm sure, pulling troops out and allowing a Turkish invasion. But he reversed course again soon after, sending troops back into Syria, who must have loved that. Why? To secure the oil. That's a quote. Graham and other hawks had used the oil issued to sell Trump on a continued U.S. presence in Syria. By continuing to maintain control of the oil fields in Syria, we will deny Syrian ruler Bashar al-Assad and Iran a monetary windfall, Graham said in an October 2019 statement. We can use some of the revenues from the future oil sales to pay for our military commitment in Syria. Did we? Trump said a few days later that he and Graham totally agree on the oil. Syria's central government has condemned the reports of American oil activities as a scheme to steal Syria's oil and an assault against Syria's sovereignty. Rayburn, however, argued on Wednesday that Delta Crescent Energy is in Syria to benefit the locals. We support trying to get the economy of northeast Syria up and running to the extent that it can under present conditions of war, he said. We're talking about the communities that were victimized by ISIS, but the founders of Delta Crescent Energy itself may not see it as in such benevolent terms. We own the whole eastern part of Syria, Reese said in an October 2019 interview with Fox News, explaining what the U.S. strategy in the Middle East should be. That's ours. We can't give that up. So once again, just back to the basic childish interpretation that Trump gives us. We conquered it, and now we can take the oil, and it belongs to us. But we're going to help everybody. But it's nice to, there is a theory under which you want to, help build up an economic infrastructure in a war-torn region, but I don't know that you necessarily start with the oil. Maybe medicine would be a good idea, or food, but not from America, not anytime soon. Okay, well, let's see. Maybe under Joe Biden. We'll see how that shakes out. All right. There, again, still much, much more. How can we get to the rest? What else needs to happen? Let's see. Oh, well, let's throw this one out there, too. I thought you might enjoy this one. There's going to be a short take again from Tegan Goddard's Political Wire. Trump's Twitter account is in jeopardy, if you were wondering about this. After Joe Biden is sworn in as president on January 20th, Donald Trump's 11-year anti-establishment conspiracy-fueled salvos on Twitter could come to a screeching halt for repeatedly violating the platform's content rules, Adweek reports. Twitter, here's the explanation, which has committed to more stringent rules against peddling misinformation this year. It hasn't stopped them yet, but here's why, right? More stringent rules against peddling misinformation, like labeling rules-breaking tweets, which isn't great, but has repeatedly slapped Trump on the wrist for his behavior. But unlike normal platform abusers, the company has refused to banish Trump outright because, well, he's the president, allegedly. Twitter's world leaders policy was codified last year and treats some rule-breaking tweets as newsworthy, but that designation will no longer protect Trump once he's a former president. So that's interesting. They may end up saying, well, it's still newsworthy because he's a former president. I don't know that it's definitely going to do the trick, but it would be nice if they finally said, let's be rid of this guy once and for all. So just that's out there. I don't know what's going to come of it and whether or not it will result in his banning. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to make mention of. I'll just quickly mention that from report from Wisconsin. Wisconsin was the only state, in case you were wondering, did everybody make it under safe harbor deadlines the other day? We assumed that everybody did, and the answer is no. Wisconsin actually missed the safe harbor deadline. I don't know if it's going to have any practical effect on things, but they did miss the deadline because there's ongoing litigation in Wisconsin, or was anyway. I don't know whether the Kraken smackdown ended things there or whether there's another case, but they have certified and they have sent their certificates. And so that part is done, but apparently they did it after safe harbor, but that doesn't mean anything automatically. It just, I guess, means they wouldn't be able to avail themselves of the automatic protections, such as they are, of the safe harbor provisions. But I don't know. They don't seem to be protecting anybody from anything right now. Okay, just thought I would note that for the record. Wisconsin, get your act together. All right, let's see. There are at least two other ways that we could end things here in a very interesting way. I might be able to fit both of them in if we kind of just do highlights of it. Here's something totally weird and off the beaten path, totally esoteric. One of the dumb things that gets referred to you on out of pocket when you take their suggestions for whatever crazy crap they want to throw your way. And I'm susceptible to that when I see a intriguing and weird headline. And let's see. The reason I thought I might be able to integrate this into the show, just besides the fact that it's weird and interesting and you might like it for that reason, I don't know. It's a bit of a downer, so I hope we won't end on this one. But I guess if you're hanging on to the possibility, like, okay, when Trump is out of office and he no longer has the protection to lean on, the crutch of you can't indict a sitting president. He's no longer a sitting president. What's going to happen? We don't have a great track record in this country of prosecuting people after they've left office, you know, the office of the presidency anyway. We all know that. I guess this is a weird sort of historical twist that I didn't think I was going to get to. But you all remember the Alamo, right? Because you're admonished to remember the Alamo every time the Alamo gets mentioned, unless you're talking about the car rental company, in which case I could care less whether you remember them or not. But I bet you've never forgotten them. So we have that going for us. But I guess I don't know. We'll launch this little attack on American mythology. I don't know where that comes from. My guess is that Remember the Alamo was chiefly popularized in modern parlance by the Davy Crockett movies, I would guess, which most Americans by now have forgotten. But if you're old enough and you saw those things either growing up or many years later, when you were a kid, or whatever. But I guess now under the more corporate Disney management, those things are probably locked away somewhere, and the only time you'll ever be able to see the Davy Crockett movies if you pay $6,000 through Apple TV. I don't know, whatever. But a lot of you will recognize, okay, that was a popular series, back in the day, and when you could still see Disney reruns because they were just good old wholesome entertainment. You didn't have to pay extra. People saw them, so I'm aware of them as well. And of course, Davy Crockett saga ends in the Alamo, and I'm wondering whether the popularity such as it is of the "Remember the Alamo" slogan, that may be original to the moment, but it may have been revived with the Davy Crockett stuff in when was that from? 50s, 60s? I don't even know. Anyway, I'm wondering whether it's a more recent phenomenon, like, as it turns out, the popularity of "In God We Trust," which wasn't considered and wasn't any sort of official motto of the United States. It appeared on the money, but this too, that and was a latter day development. Oh, and the addition of "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which also wasn't original to the Pledge of Allegiance. But anyway, I'm wondering whether it fits in there or not, or the new popularity of "Remember the Alamo." And I ask this because apparently we've forgotten the Alamo for the rest of our history. I just found this. This was supposed to be about, a lighthearted piece about something completely esoteric that I found in one of the suggestions of Pocket. How a Mexican general's exile in Staten Island led to modern chewing gum. Well, okay. Interesting, intriguing. Let's read the article, whatever. But it was the subheader that I said, well, what Mexican general got exiled to Staten Island? And what kind of exile is that? Would Mexico sentence you to exile in Staten Island? They might. Staten Island, it's Staten Island. But the subheader gives away the game. He captured the Alamo. Hey, I know who did that. Lost Texas and helped invent Tutti Frutti. Okay, who cares about Tutti Frutti and chewing gum and all of this stuff? Well, okay, that's the main focus of the article. Apparently, the guy we're talking about had a hand in all of that stuff. But, of course, the thing that strikes me is, well, we all know, I think, the name of General Santa Anna, the villain of the Alamo, right? I'm a long story short this thing at this point, but apparently the Alamo has just fallen right behind me into the sink. Anyway, General Santa Anna, the villain of the Alamo, lived out part of his exile in Staten Island, and apparently everybody in Staten Island was like, oh, hello, General Santa Anna. We must have forgotten the Alamo. Like, he's just a friendly neighbor. Let's invest in chewing gum with you and invent Tutti Frutti with you. And wouldn't you think, given what we now suppose the popular view of the Alamo and how important and and Santa Anna, what a bastard, what he did killing all the people in the Alamo, would you think that he could move to Staten Island and live in peace? And people wouldn't, I don't know what you do. I guess in Staten Island, light a bag of flaming dog poop on his porch, ring the bell and run away. I guess that didn't happen in the 1850s, but whatever. I guess the butler would come out and stamp on it, and you don't want that. Anyway, I just found that kind of astonishing, and I'll give you the article in case you're interested in finding out about his connection to Tutti Frutti and or chewing gum. But what a saga. But I found that kind of fascinating. And I just, like I said, it was a bit of a downer. Like, if you think we're going to prosecute Donald Trump after he leaves office, I guess consider our record in prosecuting anybody, including Richard Nixon, George W. Bush figures, or George W. Bush himself, or Dick Cheney, whatever. But consider that Santa Anna was able to peacefully move to Staten Island and live there in relative peace and safety with nobody bothering him. So I don't know how good we are at this stuff. There's another article that I intended to read at some point, which I might now just include for your reading offline. Well, you'll read it online, but off of the show. Let's see if I can find it here. There was, I think, a Slate piece that I mentioned and almost got to one of these days, and now I can't find it immediately, but it's around here. But it was basically for all the worry. Here it is, Slate piece about prosecuting a former president and what that would mean for the United States and blah, blah, blah. Here's a Slate piece by Joshua Keating, dated December 2nd of this year. What happened when other countries prosecuted former leaders? It happens all the time, just not in the U.S. And, of course, we're almost out of time, so we can't read all the way through it. But interesting approach. Might be wise to give it a look, and it would be interesting to see whether the recommendation is that it's maybe not such a bad thing after all. So that's some good recommended reading for the weekend. And I guess we'll just do things lightning round this way here and get to a couple other items that I wanted to discuss but don't have time for. This was an interesting one. The New York Times reporting the other day let's open it up, December 8th, Jack Nicas, I don't know, Nicas, with this sort of fascinating report. Headline here is, he pretended to be Trump's family, then Trump fell for it. I missed this story entirely, I think. For months, the subheader says, a 21-year-old Trump supporter impersonated Trump family members on Twitter, spreading conspiracy theories, as I suppose the real family members might do, asking for money, of course, and eventually drawing the attention of the president. And I guess in the interest of time here, we'll say drawing the attention of the president, including getting retweeted and having him thank the fake account of his sister Elizabeth. Last month, between tweets disputing his election loss, President Trump posted an article from a conservative website that he said his sister Elizabeth Trump Grau, I hope I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, Grau, Elizabeth Trump Grau had just joined Twitter to publicly back her brother's fight to overturn the vote. Thank you, Elizabeth, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter. Love, all caps, L-O-V-E, love. But the Twitter account that prompted the article was not his sister's. It was a fake profile run by Josh Hall, a 21-year-old food delivery driver in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I was like, oh my goodness, he actually thinks it's his sister, Mr. Hall. I'm sure he said, oh my goodness. But a fervent Trump supporter said in an interview last week, it was a surreal coda to nearly a year of deception for Mr. Hall. Since February, he has posed as political figures and their families on Twitter, including 5 of the president's relatives. He had pretended to be Robert Trump, the president's brother, who recently died, of course, Barron Trump, which is supposed to be completely off limits. And no, you should be beheaded for doing anything involving Barron Trump, unless, of course, you're a Trump supporter, in which case it's all cool, and pretending to be Barron on Twitter. Wow. And Deborah Birx as well, the White House coronavirus response coordinator. The accounts collectively amassed more than 160,000 followers. Now, the outrage to me is not just that he did this, of course, and not just that he's being celebrated for it, and now he's a famous guy, and Twitter apparently does nothing about it. I guess once they found out about things, they one by one eliminated these accounts. I guess I'll close it out by saying this about this. I guess I can't understand, and maybe this is why we'll never reach an understanding, and that no understanding is possible, of Trump followers and Trump supporters. But how can you be a Trump supporter and stay a Trump supporter when you, as there's nothing wrong with the work, I'm sure, or maybe the company's not that great, but if you're a DoorDash, I think they say down here, identify the company he works for, a DoorDash delivery guy in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and you on a whim can pick up Twitter and pretend to be the sister of the President of the United States and fool the President of the United States into believing that you are in fact his sister, how does that not make you lose confidence in him as President of the United States? I mean, I guess anybody can make a simple mistake, but given that, and I guess he just dismisses all the accusations all the way along, but given that the knock on Trump, of course, is that he's been manipulated from the beginning by all sorts of nefarious actors, including Vladimir Putin and the Chinese and everybody else. And I mean, you'd think there would be layers of protection for a real president, and a real president wouldn't be doing his own tweeting offhand on an unsecure phone, etc., but I don't know. I guess if you can get past all of that, then I guess you can stay a Trump supporter under any circumstances, but it makes no sense to me. I've been able to fool him on something so basic that, you know, anybody who falls for this, who falls for thinking it's their own sister anyway, I can see why I might mistake this account for being his sister. But what about you? You're her actual brother. But if you can fool him on that, you just shouldn't trust him on anything. But yet he does, because I guess in his world, that makes a whole lot of sense. All right, well, that should give you some stuff to chew on, including some chicle for the weekend. I'll be back on Monday, of course. Greg will be joining me. And now, a time for Justice Putnam to take things away on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next, right here. Stay tuned.
Netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, he starts off with the claim that Trump faces a slew of civil and criminal legal probes when he leaves office. We'll see whether that stands up. What about from around the world? All the international stuff is down at the bottom here. Finland says that radiation levels have risen following an incident at a nuclear reactor in the western part of the country. Sounds like trouble. I hope they can rake it up.